Come on, YouTube stream. You can do it. It's doing it. I think it's recording this. All right. We've made it to week 5 already. Man, time flies when you're having fun. So far, so good. You guys want to talk active reconnaissance? I hope you do, because that's the only slide deck I have ready. When we're done, though, hopefully we'll know how to do network scans, vuln scans, and a little bit of app testing. So this is something we were talking about earlier. Network scanning, like with tools like Nmap, which if you've played around with integrating that into, like it integrates into the whole Metasploit framework so that you can like take Nmap scans, bring them in there. Look at the basics with that. And then Hping, your buddy, that everybody seems to keep using, but I've yet to find anything I can do with Hping. I can't do it with Nmap, but there it is. So ideally, we've done our OSINT, we've done some reconnaissance, and we're ready to move into like the active stages of reconnaissance. So this is the place where we're probably going to wake up somebody's network intrusion detection systems. So even if we're doing the stealth scan mode in Nmap, we probably are going to trip some wires somewhere. So a well-defended network will probably have like a network intrusion detection system on it that's looking for, you know, alerts, weird network traffic that is you know, raising some red flags. And ideally, like a really well-defended network will also include honeypot systems that nobody should be talking to ever anyway. Those should start lighting up like a Christmas tree when somebody starts talking to them. And there should be honeypot systems that look like somebody should be talking to and hopefully even get talked to in order to make it look to an attacker like they're legitimate targets. So when this is like the real difference between active and passive, you know, like we talked about, is dumpster diving active or passive, depending on where people put their trash. The real thing is an active scan gets noticed, or at least has a relatively high potential to get noticed. And so that's when we're planning this stuff all out. We've gone in, we've done our OSINT work, we figured out what the network looks like. And that can start to become like a recursive thing, where like you figured out what the network looks like, and then you go back through and maybe you've learned some more about what the network looks like in the process of doing that. Like as you've gone through and you've looked around for hosts and networks, infrastructure, you found new networks, right? You're like, oh, well, this host is talking to this network over here. Now we have to add that to our plan and update them. Once we find a host, we go through and scan for open ports or enumerate the open ports in order to figure out what kind of services that host is providing to the network. Some folks are surprised to learn that they have, you know, that they're providing services to the network. Like even your client, quote unquote, systems oftentimes are running things like the Windows, what do they call it? Microsoft now does peer-to-peer delivery of their updates. So clients act as hosts and share files around on the network, which maybe you want to happen and maybe you don't, and maybe is, you know, potentially, I've yet to hear of it like an O day into this, but there's potentially a place where you could have some issues, right? It's running a service. Services sometimes have problems. Once we know what they are, an active scan will do things like start connecting to those services and request the banner at the very least, maybe try and log in to a system with the defaults login. Again, stuff that is going to start setting off alerts on the network, which means like, hopefully you're prepared for that. It's part of what you're intending to do, but you will start tripping alerts that look something, or maybe a lot like these. So this is like that Microsoft service I was talking about, that Voodoo Windows Update Peer Sync. Some nerd at the Network Operations Center is going to see on their list of potential issues that we've got something going on peer sync, or you'll trip the local connection on that and freak people out. That local host-based intrusion detection system, or HIDS, will fire off. So once we know what services are running, next step would be to go figure out which of those services, which ones of those, like the low-hanging fruit, which of those services already have like known vulnerabilities about them. So we've got a network, we've gone through and enumerated what ports are on that host, what services are on those ports. Based on that feedback, now we can develop a list of potential vulnerabilities to attack on that network. And then this is sort of where it becomes recursive. So we planned our scan, we went through and figured out what was on it. During the process of doing the more intrusive scan, we may have found another network, another group of hosts, another something, and now we have to go back to step one and repeat it over again. There's a handful of tools you should be aware of for doing this sort of thing. Nmap's probably the most popular. Do you guys know if your Kali boxes have Nmap installed? They do? They stopped supporting that by default in the 2020.3 version that I was playing with just last night. I was surprised to learn that. But apparently, I was reading their blog postings, and the nice folks over at Nmap get a little salty about how Kali fails to keep their stuff updated. Let's do that later. So this one from last night stopped including it, but it's on our pen tests version of this pen test Kali Linux. Now I have like 600 Kali Linuxes opening up. That's cool. So Nmap is the command line version of the network mapper, and then Nmap is the GUI version of that. It's like Nmap with training wheels on it, so that you can kind of learn the syntax and just, instead of having to go to the man page every time you want to tack on something or another, you can just use the GUI to click a button and have that selected. So what did I make John D's password? I know what I made it. Yeah, no Nmap in the last version that I installed. This one I think has it. Yeah. But so as you go through in Nmap, it'll help you build the hosts you want to connect to. Angry IP Scanner is a Windows version of that. On have you guys seen the Windows equivalent of Kali from our friends at Mandiant? It is called the Commando VM. Now, let me pop it up for a second. Which virtualization software? I'm so confused. I think this virtualization software. We'll see if my VPN's functioning today. Looks like I need to reboot, and I'm not doing that. But Angry IP Scanner is like one of the ones you might use if you were using Mandiant's Commando VM to do remote connections. Also, Netcat, like one of the most useful tools you can learn, not just for doing banner grabbing, which is kind of sort of what it's useful for. Did I bore you guys with the Nmap or Netcat from point A to point B stuff? Is this ringing a bell? It's kind of a super useful tool, and useful for like data exfiltration or pivoting inside of a network. If you can use Netcat to forward packets from, like, if you're on the other side of a firewall, you can open up a Netcat connection and use it to move around things in a network. So these are our good friend Nmap, useful for finding, all the things on a network. This is super true of not only from a security perspective, but if you are a blue teamer or a network administrator responsible for keeping track of what's on a network, this is a tool you should be using. You got either protocol on top of TCP/IP, does a moderately good job of fingerprinting which IP addresses and which services are available on that. You've got a bunch of different types of scans that you can use to figure out what's going on. It will figure out the network path to something using tools like traceroute. And then you can add all kinds of crazy scripts to Nmap. So you can add app busting scripts into it. You can add a bunch of stuff into it. This is a new one on me. We probably should separate this out. That looks like the basic syntax of Nmap is scanty option targets. What we're trying to get to there is scan type. Hyphenate that. Options and target. And again, if you've got Nmap handy, which if you've got the stuff working, you do. Let's see what network I'm on here. Some internal network. Let's just scan my local network. Always fun to try and break your home network, especially when you're on Zoom remotely talking to people and streaming to YouTube. There's no better time to screw around with your network than then. All right, now I have a network to scan. So if I wanted to do a scan of my network, I'd first have to foreground the Nmap process because I backgrounded it. And then I give it the target address, and the address of my network is going to be like 192.168.1. So, and it's already giving me helpful advice on what I might want to set that up as. So 0/24 would scan the whole 24 subnet. You've got, you know, the next thing was type. We can do intense, we can do ping, we can do quick. We can do quick with traceroute. And notice as we're popping along here, Nmap is updating the command that I'm going to be putting in there. And then you kind of just hit go. And let's see if my network falls apart as I start scanning while bopping through. It started. Another fun thing to do when you're doing Nmap scans, especially if you're trying to learn, is fire up Wireshark and just watch like the calamity ensue. There's a lot of chit chat happening on this network all of a sudden. I broke it. Just can't be expected to do all of that at the same time. You can do it. You can do it, VirtualBox. All right, stop that scan. I assure you it does that for a long time. There's a bunch of nonsense showing up as it churns along and tries to figure out what's going on the network. We'll come back to that in a minute and see what, if it found anything on my network. Always interesting to see what like VMs do inside of your, you know, host machine that's got a firewall turned on. So we went through and we figured out where we were scanning, right? I threw the CIDR notation of my network in there. If I was a 10.10.10 network, it'd look like that. Mine was 192.168.1. You could go through and do a range. You could do a text file. You could exclude stuff. You could provide a file that excluded stuff. So if you're on a pen testing engagement and your client's like, you can scan everything except for the, you know, the defibrillator machines and the pacemakers, because you might kill somebody if you break those. So like you can put those into a file and keep them out. Then it goes through, by default, it checks the 1,000 most common TCP ports, which is why a nice security measure is to put a service running on a non-standard port, but it's not like complete security. But taking your SSH client or server and moving it to a non-standard port means that if, you know, somebody does an Nmap scan, they won't see it. You can tell it just scan everything, all 65535, which is like what you get when you take 2 and raise it to the 12th power, because there's 12 bits available for the port field in a TCP or UDP packet. You could scan them all. SNMap's the same idea. It builds these profiles for us that we saw. Looks like I have found stuff on my network. So I chose the quick scan profile, and that found me. Always interesting to see what actually responds on my network. A bunch of Marvel-related stuff. Scarlet Witch up there. Even before WandaVision, Scarlet Witch was on my network. Silver Surfer, Doctor Strange. And then a list of the available ports on those things. Let's see, Doctor Strange is running SSH, MSRPC. I don't know why Doctor Strange is running SSH. Now I'm curious. So you learn stuff about your own network when you go through and scan things. Silver Surfer, that's a Mac. That makes a little more sense. The Google Nest Mini, I know why that thing's running HTTP. The printer upstairs is probably all kinds of vulnerable. If the NSA is sitting on my network, they're up there on that printer. That thing is sketchy. So that is our friend ZenMap. The command line stuff is like build it yourself. We have options. You can skip pinging entirely, so you could do a port scan, fingerprinting, and whatnot without the ping, which might set off, like, again, you're worried about setting off alarms. If you want to focus on pinging, the ping scan focuses on PE. You can use TCP and then pick the TCP packet type that you're going to use. So sending a synchronized packet or sending an acknowledged packet. You can use UDP if you want to focus on what UDP ports are available. Using DNS information you should be kind of careful with. If the host that's scanning is on the same network, that's gonna raise alarms, right? You'll probably be, that DNS resolution traffic would be visible to the defenders. It also, if I were a clever network defender, I might have IP addresses that resolve to domain names that have alerts associated with them. So, you know, if you resolve the IP address for 192.168.123 or something on my network, it might resolve on our network to be like honeypot.alertmerightnow.com. So it can get you in trouble. The traceroute scan uses traceroute. The default is the SYN scan, manually specified by SS. The TCP full connect scan does the whole three-way handshake, does a SYN, gets a SYN and an ACK, and then provides an ACK back. The fun ones are like a null scan is sort of interesting. The Christmas tree scan lights up all of the different TCP flags as they go along. Somebody told me a mnemonic for the TCP flags the other day that wasn't good enough to have stuck with me, but I thought was funny. All of the flags are in there. All right. Now I gotta look it up because it's gonna bug me. There it is. Unskilled attackers pester real security folks. UAPRSF is the mnemonic that I'll paste into that chat. To remember fin, sin, reset, push, ACK, and urge. Unskilled, yeah. So reverse order. If you want the ACK scan, just the ACKs, which is kind of a weird way to scan a network. It won't tell you if there's an open port, but if you're trying to figure out what's going on in the firewall between the scanner and the target, could come in handy. And then non-TCP protocols, UDP would be the biggie. It's the other one that gets used, although UDP doesn't always, oh man, help you out. And of course, Dan Messler has an article about how to remember the TCP flags, because that's the kind of guy he is. Nmap has this huge database of how different operating systems respond to various connections. So using those, it can do fingerprinting, where based on the response it gets back from a type of scan it's doing, it will try and figure out what type of stuff it is found on the network. So I wonder how good it is with things like, how did we did a fine job of fingerprinting. Did I not tell it to fingerprint anything? I guess I didn't. I could go back, well, ports, topology, host details. Nope. We could rescan, I suppose. The slow comprehensive scan will take a while. It did find host names, but not the OS. So if you go back through and do -O, it will go through and try that fingerprinting. So I could do the quick scan, add -O, run it again, and just cross my fingers and hope my network doesn't blow up again. Now that it's going to do a little bit of a more thorough scan. So it's going to try and find a match. Maybe it do, maybe it don't. What the operating systems have done, like in response to the way this works, is they've tried to either randomize or standardize whatever the response to these non-standard packets look like. So it tries to, the operating systems are aware that this is a thing that's going on. And it used to be you would be able to get away by figuring out like how it handles creating TCP sequence numbers, and stuff like that was different and like a per operating system thing. They've tried to make that more unique. So the more like modern, I wouldn't even say advanced, like Windows 10 is pretty good at not getting identified. The more modern the operating system, the less likely it is to be able to figure this stuff out. So based on like what your terms of engagement look like, you might care about concealing these scans. So you can set them to like super slow paranoid mode, where you set the T value to 0, or to 5, which is insane mode, where you just spam the network with multiple connection attempts on the client side, which maybe not great. If you're trying to evade a firewall, using -F to break your scan packets into little bitty fragments that then get reassembled, used to be a great way to slip past a firewall that had like rules for what it was going to detect. So if it didn't see I am an evil packet, and instead saw a packet go past that said I, and another one go past that said am, and then another one that said evil, and then it saw the other one out of order that was A, the firewall would ignore it, so you would have effectively evaded the firewall. But when it got to the target would say, oh look, it's a TCP/IP series of packets that are out of sequence. And it would put them back into the appropriate sequence, so you'd have evaded the firewall and gotten to the target. So a thing you can do, you can try to fire up decoy addresses. So if you're coming from 192.168.10, you could make it look like there are other scans happening from similar addresses. Zombie scans are interesting, but you need an idle host to be on the same network, or to be on a network that you are scanning. And then you spoof the packet so it looks like it is bouncing off of, like here's evil over here, and you've got Mallory, who is or how about Zach, who is our zombie host, and we're trying to scan Alice over here. You check to see that this is an idle host, so like the TCP sequence doesn't increment very much after you send it a couple of packets. And you're like, oh cool, so this looks like a computer that's on the network that's not doing very much. Then you send a packet over to the zombie to verify the TCP sequence number, and then start sending stuff to your target spoofed to look like it's coming from the zombie that you're going to check back in with. So if you get a response back, the zombie's like, oh, I got a response. I'm going to increment up my TCP sequence. Then I check in with the zombie and say, hey, zombie, what's the TCP sequence looking like this time around? And based on the number, I will be aware that either I got a response or I didn't get a response. So as I tick through the ports, I send packets over here, and then I check back with the zombie to see if it replied on that port. And if it did, now I assume that because the zombie got a sequence incremented up, that port is open on my target, which is kind of clever. It definitely means you need to have that zombie out on the network. And it needs to be an operating system that's going to let you pull those shenanigans. And again, the more modern the operating system, the less likely it is to be a system that will let you do that. Similarly, if you've got an FTP server around, you could bounce a scan off of an FTP server and make it do the scanning for you. Not a thing that happens a ton these days. And then you can also use the source port option to pick a port and then make it like if you had a firewall that was like exclusively a firewall that dropped packets based on port numbers, you could psych it out by setting things from a different port number. Modern firewalls, though, again, getting smarter. You see next generation firewalls, next gen firewalls. They have extra blinking blue lights on them, but they do things like inspect the contents of a packet, not just ports and IP addresses. They get smarter and smarter and work all the way up to level 7 now. And then I mentioned that Nmap has this scripting engine that makes it really, really powerful and does stuff up to and including things beyond just packet inspection and sending forged packets, you know, down to figuring out if there are virtual hosts running on an IP address, going through and figuring out what kind of Windows shares are available, going through all the DNS records. Again, a nice place for a tripwire, some sort of canary in your coal mine. It can go through and do the certificates that are coming back from things, enumerate all the directories and applications running on a web server, go back through and take those traceroute results and tie them to one of those geomapping databases. Maybe that works sometimes, as long as they're not doing anything cute with like a VPN or something. And then you can do entire categories of scripts. So we'll leave that as a exercise to the student to go through and look at all of them, but you can inventory all kinds of data from using the Nmap scripting engine. It is super powerful. And then what you do with that output is sort of the next step here, right? You can take that and you've got some standard output, you know, so like a well-designed Unix application is got two things to do. One, it should do one task and do that one task well. And two, it should expect that its output, which normally will be sent to standard out, will be used as the input for some other program that hasn't been invented yet. So Nmap honors that by sending standard out, but also will take that output and send it to a file, make XML in order to be imported into some other tool, makes output that's more tailored to not being looked at, but instead being piped through grep awk, or even if you like write-only software languages, even to Perl. And then all three if you were so inclined. So that is our friend Nmap. Maybe the coolest thing out there for doing that. Hping is another tool that gets dragged up in security classes that does much the same kind of stuff. Also, Hping, really what's kind of fun that you can do with Hping is you can try denial of service attacks on things using just pings sent at an insane speed. They will send out arbitrary packets, so if you kind of want to see how the IP stack of a target host is working, Hping will let you go through and figure those out. There is another tool called Scapy that will let you automate that process in Python, which I'm kind of a fan of for that sort of thing. And by being able to do all of that, you can examine sort of how the firewall responds when I send some dumb packet or another. You can try your hand at going through and manually scanning ports and trying to fingerprint, whereas not depending on Nmap to do that for you. It can also do the traceroute stuff. You can spoof packets, you can relay packets from one to another. If there was a firewall there, you could use it to transfer files, but there's a lot of great ways to transfer files through tricky firewalls. And then the reason probably you see it in a lot of cybersecurity classes, it's a fun way to learn more about TCP/IP. We talked about banner grabbing when we were talking about netcat for a second there. You don't necessarily need a client, to talk to an FTP server. There are tools out there that will go through and do banner grabbing for you and get the FTP's server's banner back. Folks who like to put banners on their telnet servers that say things like unauthorized access prohibited, oftentimes it's nice to be able to get that from something. Helps you nail down, what service you're looking at too. If like this FTP server here, thank you for conveniently telling us that you're running version 0.9.57 beta. Now I just have to go over to the CVEs and see if there's any vulnerabilities in FileZilla server 0.9.57 beta. Similarly, you can use SNMP to go through and look for the entire network. If you've got visibility in the network, you can see if you see any of the older versions of SNMP did not do any kind of encryption. So like version 1, and I think the first part of version 2 didn't. And then somewhere in there before version 3, they figured out encryption was a good thing and started doing that. But if you could get the community string, which was basically like a password sort of, that was almost always set to public for the public stuff and private for the private stuff, not great. But it did let you go through and potentially even configure devices if you can get into SNMP. So a great place to cause shenanigans. If you can reprogram someone's network over SNMP, you can make your life a lot easier as a pen tester. Maybe you need a VLAN just for you in order to get into people's stuff. And then you've probably heard the joke about I'm behind a million proxies. Sometimes it's useful to be behind a proxy or two. So there's various proxies out there. HTTP's probably taken over, but these SOC 4 and 5s were a big deal 10, 15 years ago. So it gives you a way to hide yourself, basically. So it appears as though the connections are coming from that traffic. You can route, if you're doing an Nmap scan, if you're SSHing into something, if you're telnetting into something, bad on them for having a telnet server. But it makes it look like it's coming from them and not you. If you do want to do DNS resolution, again, even though that can trip alarms, doing it through the proxy can be useful if you're doing it from inside of that network. If you're going to send mail, those can be useful. And if there's a restrictive local firewall, so if so for years I was operating inside of a corporate network and I wanted to have access to the real internet, so I would just proxy myself through SSH into my server at home and use it there. So if you've got a locally restrictive firewall, useful for doing that. So all right, those were all the things. Are you guys ready for a pop quiz? As you'll ever be. All right, someone scans 192.168.1.0 using the quick scan, but some hosts don't appear at all. They're running. What scan profile is the quickest way to make sure you're scanning these hosts? If they're there, choose the best response possible. Intent scan all ports. Intent scan no ping. Ping scan or ping scan plus.
Is it A or B?
Yes.
Wait, what?
Your question was, is it A or B? My answer was yes, it is definitely A or B. You're on to something.
Okay, I give you a 50-50, Tyler, go.
I'll go with A.
A, close but no cigar. I think we're looking for B because one of the things I guess I should have hammered home harder was that a ping scan with, if you've got ping going on, sometimes hosts will take that as a clue to shut up and not talk to you anymore. So I think that's what they were looking for there. So if you do the intent scan without pinging, you probably hear something back. Which of these questions Which of the Nmap commands, would match how you do the right scan from the previous question? So not only do you have to know the Nmap syntax, but you have to remember what we did last time. So I think what we're asking is, what's the syntax for intent scan, no ping?
A.
Yeah. Yeah, that's it. How about you want to locate a specific employee workstation on the network, but all you know about it is a screenshot that shows Windows 8 and a chart program using a customizable UDP port. Neither is standard at the company. What would most likely differentiate that host from other hosts on the same subnet? So if we're looking for Windows 8, we would want to do that OS scan, which, let's see if mine finished up, as long as I was at it. Device type, just guessing. Probably Windows XP. That's this computer, so they're wrong about that, but it was a good guess. All right, so back to Nmap. We know it's Windows 8, and then we probably want to scan for UDP.
Does -SU mean UDP?
Yep,
Then B.
B, because we're going to scan for UDP ports, and we're going to do an OS scan, right? So if we find a system on that list that is a Windows 8 system, always fun to see what Nmap thinks my stuff is. Like, that's actually a Wi-Fi Pineapple. A general purpose broadband router is what a Wi-Fi Pineapple shows up as. So far, so good. How about this is choose all that applies. Team member wants you to modify a scanning script for the target network so it would run less aggressively and worked from a non-privileged account. Ooh, I don't think we even touched about that in the lecture. The current command line in the script is blah, 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 Nmap SS, darn it. I showed you the answer. If you were paying attention, you would have saw it just then. Nmap SS -V, ports 1 to 10,000, T4, and PA. If you can start up your VMs, it's okay to do like an Nmap man page right now. So we could change T4 to, change P to F, change T4 to T2, T4 to T5, so go the other way, and change S to T, or SS to ST, or SV to SA. Man, nope, I guess I can't get a man page for Nmap. Oh, I'm hacked into a Windows machine. Excuse me, I was in the middle of something. And Windows doesn't have a man page for Nmap. Yeah. It's apparently in the middle of exploiting something. Now, how about we man Nmap? All right, option summary. Target specification stuff. So, scan techniques. SS, ST, SA, SN. Are the different TCP scans or ACK scans. What else we got? Oh, and what was the T about? So if we wanted to be quieter on the network, Do we want to move that T up or down?
Down?
Yep, so slower. So moving from T4 to T5 probably would make more noise on the network, right?
Yes, so B is one of them.
Yeah. And then work from a non-privileged account. I don't think we talked about that one. But SS versus ST. So the SYN versus TCP SYN versus TCP connect scan. So SYN is going to send weirdly crafted packets and probably require a root. So I am going to guess you wanted to go, well, and you could even process of elimination this last one. Nope, no you couldn't. No you couldn't.
So are we thinking B and D then?
Yeah.
I think so too. All right. You also want to go through and make sure that that previous script generates an output file that can be fed to separate tools based on XML and Perl to filter out results. Which command would do both? That was like 5 slides ago. Nobody could possibly remember that one. Where's my output list? LMNOP, OS detection, output. They're there. It's as big as the font gets in a terminal. I have not been sharing my screen this whole time. Guys. How's that? Better? Easier to read?
I can see. OA.
OA. OA. Sounds legit. All right, I think I have one last one here. Yeah. So you're trying to do an SNMP walk through the network. Which of the following guidelines should you keep in mind? Choose all that apply. A, if you don't receive a reply, you might never know why. Seems to me that was on a slide somewhere. B, most devices have lockout functions that make brute force difficult. SNMP 2 and 3 encrypt community strings. I did mention that. So sniffing only works for SNMP D1 devices. I don't think that's true exactly. And then D, default community string tends to be public. E, tools like SNMP walk can easily retrieve the entire database. Which of those seem right? Should we, or which of those should we keep in mind here?
A seems like a pretty good one.
Okay, I'm down with that. And since I mentioned it, C is only partly accurate, so that one's probably discounted.
Yeah, so we'll cross that B. And I think D looks right.
All right, so A and D.
A and E.
Oh, A and E, okay. It is, in fact, also the case, if you've never worked with SNMP, that the default community string is the word public, which is dumb. All right, let me stop this recording.